Look at this. A tape recorder. It's running.
His mind and his body are working together. As he talks, he paints a picture with words and with gestures.
Take it easy, friend. We're doing the best we can to help you.
Yes, but where in the solar system could it have come from?
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give to be the truth?
Truth.
And soul!
Truth and Soul Incorporated, the New Zealand advertising podcast.
Okay, welcome to Truth and Soul New Zealand advertising podcast. We have a rare treat today because a gentleman known as Rob Sherlock turned up back in New Zealand. When I came to New Zealand in 2000, Rob had just left, I think, to go up to work in FCB in Asia. He went on to become Chief Creative Officer of FCB Chicago and Global.
Yes. Some global accounts, but mainly Chicago.
So a big job up north. He then went on to become CEO of ADK.
Yeah.
So ADK, the third biggest advertising agency in Japan.
Number
so
3.
Rob was in charge of their operations outside Japan.
Yeah.
Which, with my experience at Dentsu, is almost worth the podcast in itself. But we haven't got much time because Rob has a vital acupuncture appointment. So we will catch up on what he's been doing for the last 20 years. Originally, well, give us a bit of background, Rob. Originally from London, South Africa.
Yeah. So again, thank you, Paul, and great. Being back here, of course. I mean, New Zealand is famous in so many ways. It used to be for the obvious, and now it's just famous as the sanctuary and the sanctity of the world. And it's amazing. Got back in November and settling in as if nothing happened in between, which I should do anyhow. So yeah, born in Birmingham, England. Left for South Africa at 12. Lived there until I was early 20s. London then for a few years, and then New Zealand up until 2000, and then Singapore, Hong Kong, then Chicago 2007 to 12, back to Singapore, and then working with the Japanese for about 6 years, of which I spent a week a month in Tokyo or in Japan. So that's it. And then sort of left ADK, retired the beginning of last year, and this is it, and doing a bit in between at the moment.
So which of those 14 countries do you actually consider home?
New Zealand, without a doubt. Just again, I mean, it's especially whenever you're anywhere else other than New Zealand. And if I was in America and I said, where are you from? And I said, England, they'd go, oh, yeah, that's all right. But if I said New Zealand, The reaction was completely different. And the same for almost anywhere else, and especially for Japan, because the Japanese see almost a brotherhood with New Zealand. Yeah. They don't. It's it's a very, as you know, it's a very very complex society.
Yeah.
And I think they see New Zealand as representative of, a physically about the same size.
Physically very similar.
Very similar. And they respect nature.
Yeah.
They respect the democracy that we have. But I think it's also, it's things like the All Blacks as well. Their sort of emergence in rugby, etc. And the fact that, most of the time the New Zealanders aren't arrogant shitheads, which...
There's been a few in this podcast.
I'm certain not, Paul.
So why did you start in advertising in the first place?
So basically, I think, in my day, and I'll say that because I've been in the industry for over 40 years, but I was trying to, under my father's behest and request, trying to become a chartered accountant, which I was useless at. And my brother was a junior writer at BBDO in those days in Johannesburg. And I could see he was having amazing fun. And we shared an apartment. And I sort of like drifted away from accountancy, which I was useless at, and did a copy test at FCB randomly, and then started off from there. And it was great. I love it. Still do.
So you then went from Johannesburg back up to London?
So I went from Joburg. I worked in the industry in Johannesburg at 3 agencies, which was FCB, Lintas in those days, Low Lintas, Amaretti, Purist, and then an iteration of McCann's. Yeah. And then I arrived in London with nothing fixed up. And
Why did you go to London?
Because basically my wife and I, for a number of reasons, number one, we wanted to escape what was apartheid in full swing. And my brother was an activist, and he was arrested and put in jail for a while. So it was very close to us that things were going wrong, and we didn't want to run away. We just couldn't stand the sort of oppression of knowing what it was and not really affecting it.
And South Africa was at the time a pariah.
Yeah, 1984, it was still right in the middle of the repression of apartheid. Yeah. And so, we left and arrived in London.
In 84?
1984.
In the middle of the 80s, and I didn't start in advertising in London for about another 7 years after that. Yeah. But generally, there was a huge amount of arrogance in the UK, which had a degree of truth in it. That London advertising was the best in the world, and anything else was not really to be bothered with. And so I would imagine it would have been quite hard for someone to turn up from South Africa and say, hey.
Yeah, it was. But you know, it's. I think I got lucky.
Yeah.
Because and again, luck, I think, in our industry has got a lot to do with everything.
Yeah, certainly not talent from us.
Well, not in my case, I can tell you. I think it's because I worked on the Toyota account in South Africa and had some pretty okay success because, won a few things and as a part of the team. So I actually initially got hired by a subsection of J. Walter Thompson, Ford of Europe. So they said, we'll take you on. And it was actually based out of Berkeley Square.
Yeah.
So we were sort of semi-integrated. And then I sort of morphed over and briefly worked under Alan Thomas and Jeremy Bullmore. And
But a background for listeners. In those days, JWT London was kind of like a gentleman's club. It was full of public school boys.
Yeah.
And it was set in Berkeley Square, which was in the middle of Mayfair. It was real estate there must have cost a fortune. Massive building in the middle of it, and it was not a hotbed of creativity, but it was a hotbed of being a nice civilized place to work.
The biggest, yeah. You know, you're exactly right, mate. I mean, it had a culture, but it was emerging. And I must admit, Alan Thomas was not a public school boy. He came from the wrong side, and he actually managed to sort of sway the culture. And I think when I left in 87, it became the agency of the year. I think it swept up.
Because you left? Or?
Because I left. Yeah. That was part of their success, was me leaving. But, you know, it was amazing because you're exactly right. It was, right on one of the most beautiful squares in London. Yeah. And it had a pub in the basement. That was a company pub, of course. Yeah. And it was it was a lot of fun. So I left not because I was thrown out. It's because my wife and myself wanted a little bit more freedom than a first floor flat in Richmond, which is quite nice. But we're sort of love the open
the
spaces.
Yeah.
So then I they were fantastic. I said, look, I want to go elsewhere. And they said, right, we have Detroit because of Ford. We have Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, which in those days, and I think it was also Ford, and or J. Walter Thompson Wellington, which in those days the ECD was Roger Ginsburg, who is still around.
I know Roger.
Yeah. Really, yeah. And again, another Pom, but
oh God.
And we got on well and arrived sort of sight unseen, apart from a few faxes and phone calls, and that was it.
So you'd never been to New Zealand before?
No.
You just didn't like San Detroit because it's, that was the centre of the car industry, but they had some brutal winters over there.
Yeah.
KL was...
unknown.
Complete backwaters. In those days, the whole continent of Asia was fairly unrespected for advertising. I have no idea if it was any good or not, but it didn't have global status. And
really, no.
You went Wellington, so you got something bigger than a two-bedroom flat in Richmond.
Like after London, Wellington was obviously a bit of a shock, but not a negative shock. It was just like, wow, it's a different sort of tribe. And everybody wore those Adidas sweatpants with the 3 white stripes in those days. It became a uniform, and we thought it was some sort of sporting sort of cult, but it was just the trend and things like that. But yeah, we lived in New Zealand's biggest suburb, which was, I think, Karori in those days. And the kids were born there, so it was great. And then left Wellington after about 3 years with the same agency, with J. Walter Thompson.
Yeah.
Came up to Auckland because everything was like drifting north.
Yeah. Yeah, I talking to Jim Hall, actually.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Podcast recently, and he was, the same thing. And he thought it was that agency, that they'd felt the need to be close to government.
Yeah.
And that kind of broke down. They went, well, why don't we go up to Auckland where there's more people and the weather's better?
Yeah, and the corporates are swilling around. So, and I think especially, and again, I think it was, influenced by automotive. I think Ford were based out in Mangere or something. So it made sense. And I was at that stage J. Walter Thompson, which was good. And then I took on a role at Charles Haynes because it was just, it had just been, so...
That was an independent.
Haynes Advertising, yeah, it was one of the sort of more old school than J. Walter Thompson London. It was really, very sort of stuffy and everything. But the reason I was sort of headhunted, I can say, was... It was bought by FCB about a month before they hired me. So they went out and they said, okay, we've got to have a bit of a change of the guard. So it was good. And we sort of...
So Haynes became FCB.
Haynes became FCB.
And were you creative director? Or?
Yeah, I was ECD at that stage. So
I'm pretty sure you weren't ECD because that title didn't exist until 2001.
Oh, well, creative director. I beg your pardon. It was creative director. Yeah. Not even chief creative officer in those days.
No, or creative chairman.
Or creative chairman. Those. So it was good, and it was amazing because I always say that if you join an agency like Droga 5 or Wyden, etc., you got a tough job, even if you're good.
Yeah.
But if you join an agency like Charles Haynes in those days, it was actually relatively easy to be okay, to be good. So that was it. We evolved, and I think certainly not at what FCB eventually evolved into under James Mock and Brian van den Herk and Brian Crawford.
Yes,
and DT and all the team, because that evolved into world class, really amazing agency. I left when it was still okay. Yeah. Better than okay. Well, I'd like to say better than okay, but those are the guys who supercharged it.
So in those days, it wasn't the glory agency that it became. Would it still be Sarches Wellington who were the...
Yeah, it was Sarches and Colenso. Yeah. DDB were okay. We were, we were okay, but we were not up there. And I have to admit, a lot of we had some brilliant individuals who have really made it elsewhere as some of the juniors, etc. Who else was there? He told me I'd fired him. Josh Moore, who you've had on this.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. So just as an aside, my daughter worked in advertising in London and here for a while, and Y&R, I don't know how long ago, they hired her as an account manager. And on the first morning she started, Josh Moore walked up and say, "Is your dad Rob Sherlock?" And she goes, "Yes," expecting like, oh. And he said, "He fired me." And that was it. I think that he walked away. But, I mean, it was fine afterwards. But I don't remember it because he's...
You don't remember firing him?
No, I don't. And it's not something I was, it wasn't like...
Well, you fired so many people.
No, I didn't. It was... So anyhow,
what's worse, being fired or being fired inconsequentially?
Well, I've been fired many times, which is a good thing. But yeah, so FCB in the day, I think was okay, was good.
Yeah.
At times, but certainly not where it got. But we had some, amazing sort of evolution. We had, I've worked like with Ike, I worked with Walden. He was the CEO at one stage with Richard Smith, whoever remembers him.
I don't know him.
With the Bryans when I was overseas, but obviously had an overview of the office. And we had an alliance at one stage with Mojo. So then it was all the Mojoites, the Graham Wills and Sean Cummins and
Maddox.
Richie Maddox, who I don't know that well. Yeah. Jill Brinsden, who was part of it.
Was on here, yeah.
So yeah, it was amazing that it actually stayed intact in some ways, because it was sort of, and I must admit, I don't say this, it was slightly abused by others outside. I know that Mojo regarded us as almost the retail brand.
Yeah.
Which we sort of were, because we had...
So who was abusing you?
Well, the corporates were trying to separate us and pluck out all the creative accounts and move more retail in. Yeah. I mean, it was just, it's sort of, look, it happens everywhere. It's a land grab. And the power rules. But we persevered and Mitre 10, some great stuff, especially under Murray Watt and Alf Naden and all the guys, and New World, stuff like that. So that was the retail, and massive, chunky, successful in a lot of ways. And then we had also...
Financially successful,
creatively pretty good.
And you decided you had enough of that, and you went to Asia.
Well, yeah. So basically, like I was always in the late 90s, I was always sort of involved in the creative, what do they call it? The Global Creative Council Forum. So then Chris
for FCB. So you were on the Creative Council. So you'd get flown once or twice a year to
the Wankfest, wherever it was. And
I don't think that was the official title. People.
No. So
I mean, but this was part of the thing of being an ECD / CD in a relatively small but English-speaking market where the advertising was okay. That you would get, if you were doing a half-decent job, you'd get on the Creative Council and fly off to... Where did you go?
And just on that, I might be actually... I think for New Zealand, because, you had the Sarches, the Calenzos, you had some amazing agencies. We were sort of okay, maybe sometimes really good, but, it was intermittent, whereas they had a consistency. Yeah. But within the FCB world... In those days, we rose right up with certain work, and especially the Americans were like amazed at the Kiwi sort of attitude and the creative output. So then I the regional ECD in those days was Chris Kime, who London, but then Hong Kong, and he moved on. And then I became ECD, the regional ECD for Asia Pacific, which was a good role. So
based in Singapore?
In Singapore, then Hong Kong. So I was I was in Singapore for, I think, a couple of years, and then SARS actually started, and I was on one of the last flights out of Singapore and one of the last flights allowed into Hong Kong because I'd relocated. I mean, it was crazy. And then I spent about 3 months in the Excelsior Hotel as one of about 20 guests. And it's like a 400 room hotel. So that was the intro. But that sort of evolved, and then...
so you're used to pandemics?
I'm very used to well, my wife is, who's Hong Kong Chinese. So it was. I think as the Guilos or the expats were a little bit sort of blasé about it in those days, but and it obviously fixed itself, and then so I basically flew around the region. There was a lot of stuff, mainly pictures. So it was very, very sort of exciting, and it was obviously everything from mainland through to Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Cambodia, Laos. Myanmar was opening up, Thailand a lot, Sri Lanka, India a lot, blah, blah, blah.
So I think, because we met at AdFest, I think at the time I was regional ECD of DDB Asia Pacific.
I think so, yeah.
At a time when it meant actually very little. I didn't do anything. 98% of my job was that, as far as I was concerned, was New Zealand. And probably if I'd gone to John Ziegler, who was president of DDB Asia Pacific, and said, I need to get into all these markets and, get involved with them and try and be arrogant enough to try and raise the creative product, which would have been really doing my job. But I couldn't have done what I did in New Zealand, which was, tough work.
No, and it's a bit like I think James Mock eventually became regional ECD, but again out of New Zealand, and it's a tough job.
Yeah, sorry, listeners, the reason I'm talking about, we're talking a part of education as if you want to get into business or you're relatively senior in business and you want to you like the idea of becoming a regional ECD, exactly what do they do? I didn't do very much other than have the title and go to occasional creative catch-ups, but I get the impression that you did a lot more than that.
Yeah, I did. Look, I've got to admit, mate, that I always say this. I think I'm an okay writer. I think I'm an okay creative. I think I'm a better leader and instigator and sort of provoke work out of the people who I work with. Yeah. So I used to get really involved. I mean, again, if it was a lot of new business and I fronted it up wherever it was or helped with the team. But, as I think I mentioned in one of those articles that maybe you saw, wasn't that you could just fly in, nobody knows you, and harness the power of the Indian creatives, because they couldn't give a fuck about you, and that there's the dynamics of who is this, etc. So you had to spend the time. So when you flew in the first time, it was introduction, it was interest, it was finding out about them and how they work, etc. Then you flew in again and you might, have more trust or respect in their eyes, then again, and you built it up over time. So eventually you could become a part of the team. You don't have to necessarily fly in there every time, but it became a relationship that added value for their office.
So they knew who you were when they got an email going, we're working on a pitch, can you help?
Yes.
It wasn't just... Now, something else that I found during that time, so I was flying up from New Zealand to whatever, Singapore or Hong Kong, generally, and I say to the guys, it doesn't seem right to me that I should be a regional ECD based in New Zealand. Yeah. You should have somebody from Asia doing this job. And they said to me, no, you don't understand, because you're a white guy, everyone hates you equally, whereas the rivalries and the tensions between all the other nations, there were currents that probably we will never understand, that actually made it easier to have someone from outside. Did you find that?
Look, without a doubt, some of the what do they call them? The seagull leaders who sort of fly in and shit over everybody and then fly out.
Yeah, that was my model.
Yeah, right. Well, they were not liked because they felt they weren't relevant, and it was more of a master-servant thing. But as I said, mate, I found if you spent the time and you tried to understand, the culture of the people, the environment of the agency, the competitive set, and you opened it up and you had like a conversation without being like a condescending expat sort of twat. Yeah. It worked most times. I mean, like again, there were fiefdoms and there's politics everywhere. Yeah. But most of the time, I think if you became relevant and you listened and you added value, especially for the CEOs, they're all the gateways. Yeah. They're almost like locking it in and saying, don't touch my people. Or you can look, but don't touch. But
were the CEOs of the individual offices, were they resenting you because they're paying for you?
Yeah, so a couple. I never broke through a couple. I had my the biggest issues in India, not because of the people, but there was one CEO, I'll tell you his name, Anil Kapoor, who was a very dominant figure. I think actually his son's a film star. And he started off with open arms, Rob, come in, But then I started to put pressure on the office to up the game. In the nicest possible, better creative work, get better people if you can. And he resented it because then the internationals say, well, you've got to do better work. Look at the other agencies. Look at Ogilvy. Look at et cetera, DDB. And then he turned fucking ballistic and eventually tried to get me fired, which I sort of was fired, but then I was rehired because anyhow, it was just the ebb and flow of a political structure in a corporate American multinational.
You had a regional CEO at the time?
Yeah, Ben Barnes.
Ben Barnes. So presumably the relationship between the two of you was
it was important. Good. He was American. He was ex. What was he? But anyhow, a major agency, and he was solid. I mean, he was a businessman. He was all about the numbers. He wouldn't interfere in great work. And he sort of promoted it, but he was good.
Yeah, you need to do great work, but he wouldn't actually.
Well, he'd push as much.
Pay for it.
Yeah. Well, no, he said no. He was. I must admit, he was a smart guy. And then in those days, the regional, as you might know, you've got the regional planning head, you've got the regional media head, you've got the regional, I think it was CRM, and you got the regional ECD, and you got the CEO. And that was the team. And we found that if it's a major pitch, like, in China for General Motors or something, if you put all of those in on the ground and made sure that we weren't overtaking the locals, but sort of supporting them. And even in the pitch, not everybody was there. It's not just the stupid show of might and.
But if you had say the GM pitch in China, who leads that pitch?
Well, dependent on the client. If it was a local client, obviously it has to be in language. But a lot of the multinationals, from Kraft in those days to Fonterra even, and et cetera, was in English. But the leader had to be sort of the CEO of the office. But sometimes they were, supported even, at the lower ranks, et cetera. I mean, it was very much. It was a casting. Yeah. What is right for client? And sometimes you want all the internationals in the room because you've got all the internationals from the client as well. Yeah. And then you lied a lot, saying, "Oh no, I'll be up here every month for a week and handhold the process." And if you won, you sort of followed up, but it was hard.
So, did you have any disastrous pitches?
Fucking loads, mate. Loads, which were,
because they're always the fun ones.
They're the fun ones, and so often. I mean, you know what it's like when you fuck up. It's just know it.
No idea.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Well done. Arigatou gozaimasu. So we had some sort of off brief, and then the cultural crash. was terrible because, I mean, again, pitching, and I never forget, we had the Samsung remit globally at a time.
Oh, boy, what sort of time was this?
Shit, mate. This was, I reckon, 2000s, maybe 2003 or 4.
Yeah, so Samsung hadn't quite reached
quite. And this was
massive scale that it did.
Yeah, and then basically we had to work with Chael, as I still think, but it was right.
Chael is the Korean
agency.
Is owned by the daughter of the Samsung chief. Or
one of the chaebols, which are basically so yes, it's like interbred. Yeah. We used to fly into Korea and go in and show Chael the work, and they used to nod. And then went with Chael, to present it. But a lot of the time, and the feeling, it was a room full of sleeping Koreans.
Yeah.
And, sometimes, I think for us it was just, my God, what's happening? And sometimes it was great and sometimes it was awful, but it was always the same.
So you just impassive?
We hadn't a clue.
Yeah.
We hadn't a clue. And it was basically, yay or nay after a few days.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have a clue whether it was successful or not.
Yeah. We did,
You've had that.
towards the latter end of my career, we did a bit of work with Samsung, and it was difficult.
Well...
Difficult. Some of the guys over here, Mike Cornwall, for example, is over here. It was a great guy, but as an organisation as a whole, it was
challenging. But they've evolved. They've evolved massively, and now, I mean, the Chael chief creative officer is, I think, Malcolm Poynton.
Yeah,
and he's amazing. He's a Kiwi, and he's done amazingly well, and he has, he's evolved it. Look, as well as I know, with the Japanese, same but different.
Yeah,
I mean, working with Japanese, the one thing I found at that stage was there's more of a respect for individualism than the Koreans at those stages. Now, that's a sweeping statement, but, but again, the complexity.
We'll come back to that, because we're going to Chicago now.
Oh, yeah.
This is getting real interesting.
You're listening to Truth and Soul.
So how did you get from Singapore straight Hong Kong to Chicago?
This was another sort of a bizarre intersection. So IPG owned both FCB and Draft, and the powers that be, which I think was Michael Roth, or it might have been before him. I think it was, decided that, wow, why don't we smash the two agencies together?
So Draft originally was like a direct
marketing. Yeah. Howard built it up and sold it a few times, and so Draft was a lot smaller than us. They had a sort of global network-ish, about 20 offices, and we were, a multinational. But the power that happened, and Chicago was the office, so they merged internationally, but it was mainly Chicago, and Chicago had an ECD, or a chief creative officer for Draft, and a chief creative officer for FCB, and they hated each other. Mm. In fact, the networks hated each other. So they thought it would be a good thing to bring in a neutral, non-American, as chief creative officer. And I'd worked with the president on SC Johnson internationally, Mark Modesto. And Jonathan Harris was the CCO, the Chief Creative Officer globally. I had a fantastic relationship with him and helped him out on a lot of the global stuff. So, and I also flew in and helped with Walmart, the pitch, which was the year before I relocated. So that was 2006, and we won it. So I led the creative again as an outsider, but then we lost it.
How did you? So this was a couple of months later. How did you manage to win a pitch? And
so what happened? And again, I think there was a mega article in the New Yorker. So Walmart
which are quite a large.
Well, it was the biggest account, yeah. And essentially, they have a very strict ethical sort of a guideline. And it's basically, you cannot buy a Walmart representative a cup of coffee. You certainly can't buy a meal for them. You have to And it's absolutely sacrosanct. So we went in, we won it. I mean, it was reported, it was amazing because FCB, Chicago, was it FCB in draft? I think it was. It had just joined, was the perfect solution, they thought. And I think we had everything right and the team was right. But
so why did they get you in to lead that pitch anyway?
Because again, the tribes at war had already started, and they were going to lose the pitch unless they had an outsider representing both of the sides.
But Walmart is such an American company.
Yeah, I know.
An outsider never.
But they liked it as well because there was somebody else with a global sort of a perspective who'd worked on retail a lot, which I had, and who could lead the team. I mean, I was a part of the team. The team was massive, but I was, the creative lead for that. But everybody was in the pitch.
Did you get to present in the pitch?
Oh, yeah.
How was that?
Good, great. Americans like an English accent.
Yeah.
Or a New Zealand accent.
Yeah, New Zealand straight, South African straight.
But the problem is then, subsequently, it's all reported. I think there were improprietary things in between Howard Draft and the marketing
He bought him
manager.
a coffee.
Well, he bought a bit more than coffee. And the CEO of Walmart found out, and it was immediate firing. And I think it was like 5 or 8 weeks. And I was virtually on the plane to Chicago to take the role.
Oh, okay. So they gone.
Rob, you come in.
Rob, you've won the
we've
largest
won
piece of business.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Get over.
It was February.
Oh no, we've been fired.
We've been fired. So I think we got fired on February it was sort of firing on February the 3rd, and I flew in on Super Bowl Sunday. I arrived in Chicago on one of the coldest fucking days of the year from Singapore in those days with what I thought was a warm jacket.
Yeah.
And then landed to what was the war between. So then it was a blame storming. Howard obviously would never admit it. And I'm not, look, I actually quite like him. He's a larger than life sort of a character, but it was a maelstrom of madness for months. But then I've got to say, under Modesto and Jonathan and a whole lot of others, it sort of settled. Then we won, I think, Kmart a few months later. So I mean, it's obviously not the size of a Walmart, but it was good. And then the financial crisis happened.
2008.
7, 8, yeah. So we were 1,300 staff in one office, or split into 2 campuses. Draft SCB Chicago was, I think it's at the peak was 1,340 employees. I mean, it was a mammoth bloody ship. And then the financial crisis hit, and I think it reduced down to 800 or 900. But we became really profitable.
Which always helps.
Yeah, which helps, obviously, as with IPG as a parent. And the whole leadership. And eventually the president got fired due to, again... So that's another story on its own. So I'll just briefly... So I'd been there about 3-4 years, and we'd got through it. We'd grown, we'd won a lot of the beer brands, etc. We were then peaking again at 1,100 staff, etc. Pretty good work occasionally. Not great. We weren't where they are at the moment. In fact, I seem to be associated with okay work, but not brilliant. And then one day I got a phone call from the president's assistant crying. So I sort of ran up. We had a spiral staircase in, and found that she was just like going like that at the office door, actually pointing. So I thought, God, Mark's had a heart attack or something. And yeah, I burst in, and there was the global CEO and the global HR head. And they said, Rob, please sit down. And I said, where's Mark? We want to tell you. And basically, we can't tell you why, but he is now not working for the company anymore. I mean, I'd had a meeting with him an hour prior, and you cannot speak to him, and legally we can't say anything. But as of now, the chief strategy or the whatever is the new president, and we want you to actually stay on. But they'd also fired the CFO and a few others. And
did you ever get to the bottom?
Yeah, well, I sort of got to the bottom. It was a political move. He was marched out about 20 minutes before I went upstairs by 3 off-duty policemen, taken to his car, removed the access, etc., etc., took his computer and shunted him off the premises. But you know, this is the corporate raiding that you read about sometimes. But I must admit, I sold my soul to the devil for a bit. I stayed for another year. It was a negotiated thing because I was just saying, I mean, I can't stay. It's awful. And quite rightly, I think they said, look, please help with the transition. We know you don't want to, and we'll make it worth your while.
Why did you not want to? Because you were friends with...
I was friends. I respected... The guy had basically led the team, of which I was one, to grow the agency throughout the financial crisis to a incredible place and space. It was amazing. I mean, it was just like, you know, everything is falling apart around you. But, and we... you know, under him, really broke through. So for me, it was representative. So, you know, it was a principle, it was ethical and everything. But, you know, eventually I could see that for the team and everything, I thought, okay, I'll stay. And they, you know, made it worth my while.
So after that, curiously, maybe that DDB talked to me about going to Chicago at that time, around 2006, 2007, which would have been interesting. two kind of expat Kiwis in the same town at the same time. But I think, lucky as I couldn't handle those winters.
Yeah.
So from Chicago, you went to...
I went back. So Chicago, I mean, it was a negotiated exit, which was fine. I could have stayed in America. I had another role with another agency group out of London on a global, but I was fucked. I was over, you know, advertising, the politics, trying to just getting on another plane at the stage. And I'm saying it was a very, you know, and I was sort of Chicago weight, and I'd become a bit of a bastard, you know, and it was not. So I thought, fuck it, I'll retire, which was, you know, so I moved back to Singapore. I moved in with a mate of mine in an old army house, black and white they call them, and you know, flew around and visited the kids and relaxed and did stupid things and.
I'll ask about those later, but
pretty boring stuff. But then, you know, it's like. You know, I love the industry. I know that. I've always loved it, but I hate, you know, the politics. And so a friend of mine said, look, ADK, who I'd not heard of, you know, the third biggest Japanese.
I hadn't heard of them until yesterday.
No. It's like ABC. It's like, who the fuck are they? So, you know, had essentially asked me... or a friend had asked me, can you speak with them about reviving a creative brand on a global sort of a basis?
Reviving?
Well, yeah, because
that's just that it had been...
Well, it's yes, because again, it's the framing of the problem in a Japanese way. I mean, it was basic. So, I mean, ADK was 24.5% owned by WPP.
Yeah.
So they also wanted something, and the creative was I mean, they were okay in Japan. They were number 3.
So bit of background, Dentsu, who I did work for, kind of have I lied with them now, but without specifically having a job. They are the single largest advertising agency in the world.
Yeah.
And they have something like 40% of the market in Japan, which is enormous. I think the
Ministry of Advertising.
Yeah, massive skyscraper, 38 floors, 7,000 people.
In Ginza. Or Shiodome.
Yeah. And the second is Hakahodo? Hakahodo, who are probably, I don't know, a third of the size?
Half the size.
Half the size.
Aligned with BBDO in certain markets.
Who themselves are absolutely massive, but because
gigantic.
of the size of Dentsu, kind of made to feel small. And then there's ADK, who are very much...
half the size of Hakahodo.
Yeah.
So
in Japanese terms, almost an also-ran, but in terms of the size of an agency, still a really big agency.
Yeah.
In Japan.
Yeah, in Japan we had, I think in head office, we had about 800 staff.
Yeah.
And then we had another 8 offices around the country, and then we had 32 offices internationally.
Yeah.
So it was the reason, I spoke about creative evolution and trying to revive the brand in terms just as regards the narrative outside Japan and the fact, and they wanted, it was more international because of their alliance with Sir Martin, who said, what's happening? This is ridiculous. You've got 30 odd offices and you've got nothing, no profile, no leadership, etc. So anyhow, I got reluctantly, and I must admit it was at the start, I thought, I don't want to do this again, but I really liked the Japanese.
Yeah.
And I had a great relationship with the 2IC, and it was done in typical Japanese way. I'll tell you this, Paul, because it was hilarious. I was still in Singapore, and they'd flown me over and said, Rob-san, can you talk to, the creative management? Oh, sure. Rob-san, like a week or so afterwards, Rob-san, can you talk to the account leadership? I go, well, fly me over, and then after 3 or 4 times, can you speak to the president's office about creative revival? And it was basically, it was the typical getting like a relationship started, and then Nakai-san, the 2IC, phoned me one day, and he said, Rob, are you available for lunch on Friday, which was a few weeks out? And I said, yeah, I am.
Where?
Singapore. Oh, God, it's wonderful that you'll be. Oh, yes, yeah, fine. So then the day prior, he said, Rob, just confirming our lunch. And I said, Nori, it's fantastic. He said, because I have to tell you, I'm flying there just to have lunch with you. The 2IC of the company, to make sure that this was understood as a respectful, definite thing, flew from Tokyo to Singapore to have lunch with.
So you weren't going for a quick bowl of noodles?
No, it wasn't. It was fantastic, and it was great. And then started off as global chief creative officer, but that was a bizarre time, but a lovely time sitting in like meetings, and so I spent a week a month in Tokyo every month. I flew there.
So it was a full-time gig.
Full-time gig, and then I flew around all the offices as well and started on that. Anyhow, it sort of evolved into, I basically just realized what I am again, which is I'm better at leading, at instigating, at finding the people and creating a belief system than actually creating the work, which I still enjoy, but I have to say. So
you enjoy it, but you suspect there might be other people who are better at it.
Almost everybody I know. Basically it sort of evolved into, they saw a few of the moves and they saw what was happening and the whole thing, and then eventually they made me CEO of all the global offices.
Yeah.
And then I was on the executive board.
The board in Tokyo?
In Tokyo.
How did that work? Because
translators, mate.
Yeah, because within Dentsu, I can't remember his name. Tim Andre.
Tim Andre.
There's ex-NBA basketball player.
6'10".
Yep. And is like Papa Smurf, 6'10", massive shock of white hair and white beard. And his first ever non-Japanese on the board in Dentsu. And you were the first ever non-Japanese on the board.
And the last, I think, as well.
Yeah, well, they took one look at you and never again.
No, it was great. How did that work? It was a lot of, respect and translation and look.
So did you actually on occasion have to stand up and present to the board
every
in
occasion.
English with a translator.
Numbers, that's all
And
they wanted.
here are the numbers.
Here are the numbers.
Yeah.
I went through it, and
Gee, you really had to trust your CFO, because if it was kind of being done in Japanese, it would be difficult for you to. What exactly does that figure mean?
Well, I sort of look. The lucky thing is about failing at accountancy is I had a basic structural understanding of the numbers, but yeah, no, it was good. Look, the fact is though, the difference in between an American multinational and the Japanese as a gaijin, as a non-Japanese, is the politics didn't affect me at all. There are politics aplenty in Japan. More so. But as a gaijin,
you'll never know.
I will never know. I always say we've got the level of understanding. You've got one layer at the top that we all understand. It's overt. It's all around us. Then sometimes in the West we've got that second layer, which is the sort of ambiguous, obtuse.
So somebody pulls you aside quietly and says, "What you need to understand is
exactly." But in Japan, those layers go down about 8 or 10.
Yeah,
that we just it's just like, really?
Because you didn't learn Japanese, right?
No.
And your reason was?
Because even if I was linguistically fantastic, I would have still sounded like a 12-year-old school kid, of which most people I know, there are a few who are fantastic, a few expats, but most, they say, I speak Japanese, and they don't know. And then after the meeting, I speak with a Japanese friend, I said, so are they fluent? They go, there's a 60%.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in another podcast. I thought, working for a Japanese company, it would be good to at least pick up a smattering. And I talked to one of my contacts in Dentsu, and they said, actually, they don't want you to learn Japanese because they're worried that you then might understand what they're saying about you. Which I was okay, it's fair enough, as long as I understand.
As long as you learn a few words and you can, and you understand the culture, sort of. Yeah. Biro. And that's the, the look, again, it's just respect and understanding our role as a gaijin in a Japanese sort of corporate culture. And then I evolved from CEO, and then I was part of, I think WPP, so I dealt quite a bit with Sorrell and Scott Spirit and the accountants, and I was the gaijin, so obviously it was easier speaking with me than any of the Japanese, but I had to remind them that I work for ADK, I don't work for WPP, even though you own 24.5% of the company. And we owned, I think, 2% of WPP globally. But eventually it became a little bit incendiary. At the same time, Bain looked at us as an acquisition. So I'd evolved at that stage. Bain Capital started the conversations. I then stepped aside to become chairman of the global operation. We brought in a Japanese, I've forgotten his name. He used to run McCann's in Japan, which was good. I mean, he's very international, but he's a Japanese, so it was a better thing. But I've got to say that within my sort of few years of leadership there, we did pretty well. We changed the culture internationally. We started, some of the offices really grew in strength. I think the Taiwan office with Richard won a lot of awards, including a Grand Prix or a Gold at Cannes and a few others. I mean, it was pretty amazing.
I believe
you. And then we, the visibility grew and everything, and it was all the things that was starting, but there wasn't the heart to do any acquisitions outside Japan. And also acquiring the talent was a bit hard. I mean, we did some, which was good. Anyhow, so that evolved. I became chairman, which was I describe it as a Starbucks, no fat milk, decaf with nothing else in it. It's basically a cup of not much. So I used to fly around, and I was wheeled out at a lot of the pictures, etc., and did a chairmanly role.
Mr. Grace.
It was. And we've got one of those.
Young Mr. Grace, that's right. Yeah.
No. Anyhow, that evolved into, I became the executive advisor to the president's office, which was basically the runway for retirement. So I think I was 60 at that stage, and it was great. And I'm still friends of the agency massively. I respect almost everybody there, and a lot of friends there, and I'm still like semi-involved. Whenever they want anything, or I feel that I can help in any way, I will. But that's good.
Keep smiling. Just keep smiling.
I love hearing about those, and hopefully another time we'll get to talk about the ins and outs of working in Tokyo, which is fun and great. As a regional ECD, going back to the work, so teams will come from all over the region, and you're working on a big pitch, Samsung, whatever, and we got these work, and it's your job to take the thread from that and bash it into some kind of cohesive, coherent, pitch-winning, clear, clean thought. How did you go about that process?
Well, I think it's like, even if you're working in a small agency or a massive multinational, it's exactly the same. I mean, the cream rises, and it's sort of the evolution of ideas within a pressurized environment. It was the same sort of process, and I think it was, again, for me, it was managing the people to get the best out of them, and creating an environment of freedom and inclusion. And it was always, I don't care whether you're the junior from Seoul or the ECD of India. If you come up with the idea, we're gonna get on board and promote it. So it was.
But it's your job. If it's the junior from Seoul who has a great idea, it's your job to then go to the ECD from India and go, sorry about that, mate, but we're actually
But if you have the relationship with the ECD in India, and he knows what you stand for, and you're not sort of upgrade an individual to downgrade him, we're all sort of part of the process. So we all have ownership. Obviously, the guy from Seoul is the instigator of that and has ownership, but we're all got to make this better and bigger. And he can't. You can.
Yeah.
So it was all of those leadership things that you learn. But again, mate, I've got to say that the one thing about experience, I always say, I mean, I can say after 40-odd years, I'm experienced. But experience is also an encumbrance, because I know what to do, which might not be the right thing.
Yes.
So I'm encumbered by knowing, this is what I used to do in the past, so this is what I'm going to do again.
And I know what a campaign looks like.
Exactly.
I know what an ad looks like, so I will beat this into shape so that it looks like that. Yeah, I have found that ability and that skill that comes through experience can absolutely
derail.
Because sometimes it requires hands off.
Yeah.
It requires to go, I don't quite get it, but it looks like it could be brilliant. So I'm going to step aside and let you guys do it. It's very hard to do that. And I've done that, and it's turned, not exactly a plane crash, but it's just turned into a pile of poop because it needed that. And other times I've sometimes enforcedly stepped back, and it's turned into a thing of beauty.
Yeah. So it's sort of like knowing when to, but the role of a regional ECD is never easy. And it's less, I believe, of being a brilliant, creative lighthouse individually, and more of trying to create a collective where everybody feels empowered, engaged, and wants to do the best. Obviously, you still have to cull at times. You have to bring in the talent. You have to make sure that the ecosystem of excitement is understood and palpable. And there's competitive sets. There has to be, etc. But it's not just saying, it's not land grab. And I've always been, mate, I've never, you pass ownership down. It's easy for me because I'm not that good. But for people who are really good, they find it bloody hard. But the great leaders always pass ownership down, I think. They're still involved. They don't say, well, it's your responsibility. Whether it's success or failure, you still have to own it.
I wonder if part of the reason for your success is your ability to, because most creators are quite arrogant and think what they do is wonderful work, but an ability to go, well, you guys have done this, to honestly say you guys have done it better than I could imagine. Okay, let's go from there. Socrates saying, I don't know everything, all I know is that I know nothing, is supposedly a strength.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not saying it yes.
You're not comparing yourself with Socrates, but...
No. But, we all find our sort of space and place in life, I think. And we find what we enjoy as well. So at the moment, I'm now involved in sort of advisory boards because I enjoy it. And I always say...
Who for?
So Rumble, which is a group out of Australia, we're in Singapore and hopefully in NZ soon.
A group of...
It's basically a mini holding company, but it's an agency at the core.
Who owns it?
So Remy, Nancy and James, who basically, the background is they created the best job in the world at, I think it was Cummins and Partners. Brisbane. Yeah. And they're great. They're lovely. And they've got media company, digital, PR, etc., who are all involved in it. It's a brilliant. So they're now, the head office is Australia in Brisbane. There's an office in Singapore with Andy Greenaway at the lead, and soon to be an office in New Zealand. So that's exciting.
So do we have any news on the office in New Zealand?
Yeah, not yet, no, but, please let me know if anybody's excited by the potential. And then an M&A, a consultancy out of
for the creators,
Singapore.
That's mergers and acquisitions.
Yes, mergers and acquisitions.
Although I'm guessing there's not a huge amount of that going on.
There's a lot going on, mate, especially in the tech and MarTech and everything, and that's their specialisation. So that's based out of Singapore, but global, and then a couple of other startups which I'm involved with in the media tech space, let's say. Which are exciting. But I always say, before I get involved, there are three things I look at. Can I be relevant? Can I add value? And will I have fun? It's not, can I earn a shitload of money?
If you can't do the first two, you go.
I'm fucking you. Yeah. But relevance is the whole thing. If you're not relevant for a role or a job or a whatever, it's gonna turn into a shit show.
Rob, it's been fantastic talking to you, and I hope. Because curiously, our careers have sort of been vaguely parallel, but in different parts of the world at different times. And hopefully we'll get to continue this conversation with some names outside the podcast.
Absolutely.
And I hope for listeners, it kind of gives an insight into the regional ECD role. Because a part of this podcast to try and be educational, give people different ideas about what goes on.
Yeah.
We haven't actually talked about work, which is fine. But what for you would be the piece of work that you'd be most proud to have been associated with? You're going to have a couple.
Well, it's and it is association.
Yeah.
Because.
You're in the same country.
I was in the same country, but I think I was asleep at the time. But there's not one. It's not like a Tutsil who's got his John West salmon, etc. I'm so sorry, I've just not got that. But some of the beer stuff out of America we did was fantastic. Some of the
which brands?
For Coors Light and for Bud Light, we got both brands in.
Both of them.
Both of them, yeah. At one stage.
Both Anheuser-Busch.
Yeah. And then the most recent is the work for ADK for Taiwan for the House of Little Moments, which was a beautifully done. Sort of multi-film webisodes for a noodle brand, which I helped Richard promote and produce and everything. But again, I mean, it's the talent of individuals like Richard, you, and some of the guys in the States. So again, I really, I could mention things where I, been involved. But no, it's
saw it on TV and thought,
I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not, and it just goes to show that I'm not a brilliant creative at all. Yeah. I mean, I'd rather work with somebody like a Todd McCracken, who I think is a brilliant creative.
That Todd next door?
Todd next door. I walked past and I thought, that's where Toddy is. And individuals like that who have produced, brilliant work. The dedication and the pain they go through, sometimes I have to manage around it if they work with me. That's my skill set, is removing...
So you're the creative enabler?
I would like to think so, unless I fire people like Josh Moore, which I still don't remember. For the life of me, I want to say... In fact, I'll contact him. Yeah, I will ask him, because I...
Rob Sherlock, thank you very much. I know you've got to go now, but that was great. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Paul.
You've been listening to Truth and Soul,
the New Zealand Advertising Podcast.
Okay, list of credits. Thank you very much to this week's guest. If you liked it, drop us a line, paul@truthandsoul.co.nz. Thank you very much to everyone at Franklin Road, Jonathan Cole, the Wastrel Shane, Vanessa, Otis, who did the logo, and Matt Stalker, who's going to play us out. Thank you.
On the Farewell Drive, we found 100 ways that our hands fit together. Centrifugal force pulls us apart as we spin. Please forgive my trembling hands, crudely silhouetted by the flickering spires of candlelight, while the wicked sleep sound, the anxious toss and turn, thoughts come not as single spies, but in battalions, while the wicked sleep sound, the anxious toss and turn. And it's at times like these that we understand our Father's fascination with dendrology. The family tree is losing its leaves. Please forgive my trembling hands, crudely silhouetted by the flickering spires of candlelight, while the wicked sleep sound, the anxious toss and turn, thoughts come not as single spies, but in battalions, while the wicked sleep sound, the anxious toss and turn.